He's an actor. He's a writer. He's performing in a one-man play about Thomas Sowell at sowellplay.com. He's also the host of the Clifton Duncan podcast and writer at The State of the Arts on Substack. And he's on X at Clifton A. Duncan. Clifton, great to meet you. Great to have you on the Will Cain Show.
Well, thanks for having me on. Not a lot going on today, so I'm happy that you were able to slide me in.
What do you think about it? I mean, you actually have thoughts. I see your X profile. I saw you recently tweet. I'm so glad things have calmed down now that Donald Trump's not in office. Talking about it, the promises versus the reality of a public that voted out or that no longer embraced Donald Trump. I'm curious what you think about it as we're wrapped up, not so much in the way people might vote, but the way things will play out in a courtroom against Trump.
Well, I have to say that as an artist, I've removed myself a bit from politics and current events. But what I will say, as someone who did not vote for Donald Trump, but who was in the entertainment industry when he was elected, I mean, I've never seen adults lose their minds in quite that way. I've never gotten past it. And I think one of the biggest things about Trump for me that's educational is that for one, there's so many things you can criticize about him. You don't have to make anything up, but they keep doing it anyway. Not that it does himself any favors. But on top of that, it's the classic tale of when you're trying to slay some monster, you become a monster yourself. And I think he's served as a useful mirror for the ugliness and depravity on the other side. And and we're still seeing that today, and the corruption as well.
What a fascinating, and I think a perspective that comes not exclusively, but uniquely from I think the mind of an artist. I mean, I saw a tweet this weekend, Clifton. I can't remember who put this out, but it was about Keith Olbermann, the former ESPN and MSNBC host, and the way he behaves on Twitter. And it was actually Jimmy Dore, the comedian, who said, Olbermann has turned in his mind Trump into this monster, but in order for him to reconcile who he is, he kind of becomes the same monster. And all the things he accuses Trump of doing and being and talking the way he does, he actually dealing with his shadow self, whatever's deep inside of him, actually ends up displaying as a way to reconcile with who he actually is, talking about Olbermann. Because he's completely crass and he's horrible on Twitter and calls people names and doesn't make logical arguments. He curses. And it's almost like he embodies who he projects onto Donald Trump. He's becoming what you said, that monster. And you're exactly right about society at large kind of becomes exactly what they feared about Donald Trump.
Well, I think what you're also seeing play out is that I do think that people have a strong sense of fairness and justice. And I think that the more that the machine or the regime, whatever you want to call it, moves against Donald Trump, the more they look like bullies. And it's so strange. I mean, to me, Donald Trump is one of the most fascinating public figures that I've ever seen. And his ascension is really quite remarkable. It's like everything that should be wrong about him, everything that should hold him back seems to work in his favor somehow. And it's really fascinating to see that as horrible as we're told that he is, the people going after him seem to be, at least in the assessment of America right now, even worse than he is. And I think pretty much the consensus now is that he's going to be reelected in November. And so, if we thought that 2020 or 2016 was a massive meltdown, I mean, I look forward in sort of a subversive way to see what happens in this November, because I just don't see any other outcome at this point.
I mean, the biggest public freakout you've ever seen. But then the part that really scares me, the whole martialization of the entity that is Washington, D.C., marshaled against Donald Trump in a way that I think we haven't even yet seen in 2020, if he were elected in 2024. One more on this, because I agree with you. I think Donald Trump, people will hear this and they'll think, I'm waving a pom-pom. I'm not. I think he might be the most fascinating person of the last century. And the reason for that is because of how he affects everyone else. Like, he is the ultimate Rorschach test. And I mean, I think books and books and books should be written on his rhetorical style, his persuasion appeal, but also how he inspires hatred. And it's like this mass psychological moment. Like the whole nation's been put on the couch, and we're all like letting out our deep thoughts or something, and letting out who we really are, devoid of all the niceties that were there before. So I don't know, but I just think the way we've reacted is what makes we as a public, was what makes him so fascinating. And you coming from the world of art, like I can't think of a world, actually journalism may be close, where you would have seen it like at its most acute point. Like everybody that you're friends with or work with probably embodied the height of this like emotional reaction to Donald Trump.
Well, it was funny because I was doing a show in Hartford, Connecticut in 2016 around the time of the election, and nothing better symbolizes the disconnect between the general public and what the arts world was thinking at that time. The first person who ever told me that he was voting for Trump was our barber. We were working on this show, and it was our black barber who was a multiple small business owner. And he and his black friend, as a matter of fact, were telling me, they was like, yeah, dog, Trump gonna make it so we can get some money. And it wasn't some knee-jerk, uninformed decision. He was talking about how under the Obama administration, he had difficulty as a small business owner and entrepreneur with the regulations that Obama had placed in the way, which is a complaint I'd heard multiple times. So his concerns were purely economic. And then I would go over to the YMCA, and the white guys over there were also talking about the election. And what they were talking about was jobs and taxes. So again, there's these economic concerns that were going on that transcend race. But then I would go into rehearsals, and it was like, man, if you voted for Trump, you can unfriend me now. Man, racist this, racist that, white supremacy this, white supremacy that. So right away, I said to myself, this is completely, they're completely off, because MSNBC is telling them one thing about what it really is about. And then the actual people, regular working class or maybe upper middle class people, are saying, well, look at his policies on jobs and taxes and business regulations. And that's what they were looking at. And so already I had a very broad sense that there was a huge disconnect between the arts and entertainment sector and the general public as far as their feelings about Trump.
So we'll come back to Donald Trump here in a little bit here on the Will Cain Show. We're going to talk about the mechanics of the new $175 million judgment, lowered from 454 as of in the past half hour here. We'll talk about that coming up on the Will Cain Show with what I think is one of America's best trial attorneys, Dave Sugden, here on the Will Cain Show. But to continue with Clifton, Duncan here. So you've got a one-man play coming out about one, and you've crowdfunded this thing, which is incredible. I think one of the most, if it's not Donald Trump, which we just nominate him for one of the most fascinating people of the last 100 years, I definitely think while he flies under the popular culture radar, he is one of the most fascinating men of the last 100 years, and that's Thomas Sowell. So why? How'd you get inspired by it, and how'd you want to focus on Thomas Sowell?
Well, a few years ago, I saw this wonderful one-man show off Broadway called Satchmo at the Waldorf, and this wonderful actor named John Douglas Thompson embodied. It was a one-man show about Louis Armstrong. And throughout the course of the show, you see this actor not only embody Louis Armstrong, but also Miles Davis, as well as Armstrong's white manager. A few years before that, you can still watch this particular show on Amazon Prime, but Lawrence Fishburne did a play called Thurgood, which is about Thurgood Marshall. And it was filmed for HBO. It's pretty successful production. Years before that, the great James Earl Jones did a one-man play about Paul Robeson. And so I was thinking to myself, and it's an idea that's been in my head for a few years, who would be the subject of a great one-man play that I could write and create and perform myself? And and Thomas Sowell had already been on my radar for a few years. And I said, well, it seems like a no-brainer to me. I have to write a show about this person who I think is very fascinating, and who frankly would not get the same kind of treatment in our regular mainstream cultural institutions. So it just sort of it came from there, and then I was urged to share my idea with people. And, the success of the crowdfunding campaign is something I could ever have imagined. It's really unbelievable. It's sitting at 140,000 right now, as a matter of fact.
On Indiegogo. That is awesome.
Yeah.
By the way, anybody watching, if you want to contribute. So first of all, Clifton's doing this play, which I think he wants to workshop it across the country and then release it on streaming later. This needs to be made. Like, I think this needs to be made. So for a moment, if anyone listening or watching isn't familiar with Thomas Sowell, just, I think, go to YouTube and look up clips of Thomas Sowell, and then you're going to want to buy his books. And he's legit genius. Like, and you know what's interesting? I think he would call himself conservative. He's black. You know what's interesting about Thomas Sowell, Clifton, is that first of all, let's forget whether or not you're conservative or not. Guys like Thomas Sowell and Clarence Thomas are interesting in and of themselves because they are different, right? Because they're individuals. And I think that nominates you on its own to be the subject of art and exploration. Like, why do you think the way you think? What was your life like? What led you to this place where, look, 90% of blacks vote Democrat. At least it's been that case in the past. We'll see what it is in 2024. But, guys like Sowell and Clarence Thomas, they're zigging to the zag when it comes to intellectual thought. And that in and of itself, agreement or disagreement, is interesting. And art should be the subject of something that's interesting, And what I was thinking about is that's made Clarence Thomas, although he's more high profile, really a target. He's called an Uncle Tom, he's called this or that. People don't do that with Thomas Sowell. And I don't know, maybe they're afraid, because if you're ever watching these TV clips, don't mess with Thomas Sowell. Like, he is never at a loss for an intellectual argument. It's like he's considered everything. I kind of find it fascinating there's not this big anti-Thomas Sowell, group out there attacking him.
Well, I think I forgot who it was. It might have been Steven Pinker, who said that at a certain point, people just had to start ignoring him because he's so effective in terms of clinically taking apart a lot of left-wing talking points. I mean, I think what's the interesting thing about men like Sowell and Clarence Thomas and the late Walter E. Williams, the economist, any black person faces immense social pressure to conform to one particular ideology. And I'm reading Sowell's memoirs right now. This is a man who, as a child, faced discrimination. He grew up during the days of Jim Crow, and he was not immune. Sowell was not immune to these ideas about black and white and this sort of left-wing, dare I say, Marxist worldview that's been pumped into generations of impressionable black minds. So to go against that in and of itself and to reject that social pressure is an immense act of courage for any black person, because everywhere you turn, whether you can't even watch ESPN these days without getting some of these racial, cultural, Marxist sort of talking points. You can't escape it. But the music we listen to, the celebrities that we enjoy, the news that we consume, the algorithms that we employ, they all kind of steer you toward one method of thinking. And one of the things I think that attracted me to Sowell is that he, like I, as I did myself, spent his life thinking one way, and then he had to shift his thinking another way. And so that to me makes him a compelling figure, not only to have the intelligence to be able to shift and change your mind, but also the courage to do so. And on top of that, the courage to just be unapologetic about, this is what I think, this is how I came to these conclusions, here is my evidence, here are the facts, here's the data that I used to reach these conclusions. And that to me is a really compelling aspect of his character.
Oh, he makes rock solid arguments. That's the thing. Impenetrable, like you said. And so the result is you just have to start, the opposition has to start ignoring him because it can't defeat what he has to say. I think I have my history correct. Sowell was on the left. That's what you're referencing, right? Early in his life. And then you said that you were as well. I'm curious about you. When and how did you make that change? And I'm not presuming, by the way, I don't know your politics, Clifton, but even your interest in Thomas Sowell and your appreciation of him suggests you're not at least wholeheartedly on the left anymore. So I'm curious how that change might have occurred for you.
Well, it's sort of a long process. I'll truncate it a little bit. I still describe myself as pretty fairly liberal, but it depends on what what topics you're talking about. And so, if I, for instance, were talking about, I think conservatives have a great point when they talk about, say, the strength of the family and family values. But you never see me preach about that because I'm a libertine. So I can't. So I would be a total hypocrite if I were to say, hey, you all should be getting married. I mean, I think that if you're going to get married, you should live. You should honor that marriage. But as an artist, I don't think it really behooves me to wholly embrace conservatism, but at the same time, I distinguish leftism from liberalism. And I think leftism is a destructive, cynical, nihilistic force that is anti-art, anti-life, and anti-society. So as an artist, I can't embrace that either. But for me, I wasn't always like this. I was a default liberal. And like I said, especially as a Black person, you grow up with these mindsets, this mindset pumped into your head. And, you're a child, so you don't really know anything else. But around 2014 is where a really big shift happened. But it was on top of these other shifts that had taken place. One, I decided around 2008 that whether you're talking about some right-wing Nazi or some far-left pasty white progressive, if you can't see me as a human being before my demographic, i.e., a Black male, then I have no interest in having any kind of relationship with you. I'm a human being before I'm Black, before I'm male. I'm a human being first and foremost. So that was a big shift for me. The second shift came a couple of years later when I basically decided to stop apologizing for being a man. The entertainment industry right now is a very, very caustic environment against males, against masculinity, and against male achievement. And I internalized all of that, especially, again, we're talking about Black America. It's a very, very, the term is gynocentric. They sort of uphold our Black queens to the detriment, I think, of our men. And there's this idea that, women are better than men, and yada, yada, yada. You're a male, you're toxic, you're trash, this, that, and the fourth. Once I began to reject that was another major shift for me. So now I'm in an industry now where racial politics and sex and gender politics are heating up, and I have self-affirming views which run counter to that. But then 2014 happened, and there was a huge kerfuffle called Gamergate, which the sequel is unfolding right now, as a matter of fact, and it's way too complicated to get into. But I basically saw the machine for what it is. I saw what was actually happening, and I saw how it was being reported on. I saw how progressives, quote unquote progressives, shut down conversation. I saw how quote unquote progressives either ignore or denigrate minorities, and sexual minorities, racial minorities, and women who do not go along with their program. I saw the corruption, the lies, just the blatant lying for what it was. At the same time, all the Michael Brown stuff was happening. Hands up, don't shoot. And the Washington Post, of all outlets, had extraordinary reporting where they even had diagrams from the autopsy by the medical examiner hired by the Brown family. There was no way that the story we were being told about hands up, don't shoot could be true, not based on the forensic evidence, not based on the physical evidence, nothing. Everything supported Officer Darren Wilson's version of events. However, we're being told by celebrities, by politicians, by everybody, these pundits, the same story. I said, these people are lying. They're straight up lying. They're lying. They're lying. They're either ignorant or lying. And I also went to the BLM website at that time as well. And I said, these people don't care about Black people at all. They don't care about Black people. They think that they're... You're
aware this has all made you a racist.
Well, it's left-wing ideology coming back at you whenever you say these things, because, for instance, I go to the BLM website and people thought that they were protesting against excessive police brutality. But when you went to the page, it was a bunch of intersectional, queer, gender theory buzzwords, which, Black people are more socially conservative than Democrats seem to be aware of. And they're not really about this stuff. But they specifically skipped over protecting or supporting fathers in that website. There was a section that said, we support mothers, parents, guardians, caregivers. Somebody wrote that section and deliberately left out the word father. And that's when I said, these people do not care about what really ails the Black community. And so all these things happen all at once.
Which is what?
And that was, say what?
Which is what? What really ails the Black community? You're alluding to fatherhood.
Well, it's just the disintegration of the family, the denigration of
Yeah.
these strong families. And we talk about these deadbeat males, but we never talk about mate selection. Why are these males being chosen in the first place to be fathers? But you can't talk about those types of things. But on the ground, people know what the issues are. You know what I mean? Like it's a very weird thing. But when you see this organization, which is a piece or a subsidiary of a larger political ideology, which runs so counter to what the true needs are of the people. Once you see all these things at the same time, there's no way that you can honestly say, I'm still aligned with these people. On top of all of that, I realized in 2016 that if you're a happy, self-actualized, and self-possessed Black person, the Democrats have no use for you. In fact, they despise you. And that was a major break for me.
What I love about your story, though, is while it's individual, while it's your path, I don't think it's necessarily one that you've blazed alone. I think it's something that a lot of people experienced. Every way you walked me through that, from the rejection of identity politics and the requirement that you accept me as an individual, from the requirements you see me as a man, that men should not be denigrated, from the lying on individual cases, that if you pointed to the truth on any number of these cases, and Michael Brown was one, but it followed with a whole host of cases in the ensuing years. If you cared about the facts, you were called a racist. That's why I made that joke, now you're a racist, Clifton. All of that, I think, is a path that has affected many, many people over the past decade. And it doesn't end up in you having to say, now I'm on the right, or now I'm Republican, or now I'm conservative. You're still capable of your own individual thought, as we all are, right? But it also lets you just see the original Cracker Jack box formula you were handed as a child, like you said, that now you've learned how to reject. I want to go here in the end, though. You have done Broadway, Shakespeare, NCIS. You're in the acting community. So now you've made this transformation personally, and then professionally, you're embracing a guy like Thomas Sowell. What's been the reaction of your community?
Well, I would say that I'm no longer in the acting community. I don't consider myself of the acting community because, for those who aren't aware, I was one of the few entertainment professionals who, in 2021, when all of the COVID mandates came down, I said, I'm not, I'd already have this disease. Like, why should I be taking this injection for something I'd already gotten? So there's a term I use for it, but I won't use it for your viewers. It starts with the word N. But I got purged from the industry because of my stances on the pandemic, which I was right about, by the way. So I still have spies on the inside. And it's interesting because, for one, the theater as a whole right now is failing. Broadway reached record highs, record box office numbers in the 2018-2019 season. They have not repeated. They have not gone back to those numbers. The theater industry, about 20 to 30% of the audience has not returned post-pandemic. There were experts predicting that by months from now, the industry will have contracted by about 50%. My friends tell me that they're having much more trouble finding work now than they did before the pandemic. There's fewer jobs out there. Same thing happening in Hollywood. So these industries now have contracted themselves. But what's funny now is that even though I feel like I got pushed out and blacklisted, now all these broke unemployed actors are looking at me, who just made $140,000, which is more than most of these people will make over the span of the year or next 5 years. And they're presiding in industries which are losing relevance and losing their stature and their structure and their power. And I think the new way to go is to forge your own path and to leave these failing institutions behind, because they're poorly managed, they're dysfunctional, they're run by people who have no clue what they're really doing. And they just told the American people that they're not essential for 2 straight years. And they're shocked that Americans happen to agree with them. And yet now I propose this idea to say, hey, let me write this play about this person. And over 900 people said, you know what, this is a great idea. I want to support this. So it's not that Americans are not interested in the arts. It's not that they're not interested in seeing culture created. It's just that they're not interested in whatever the mainstream institutions are putting out right now. And as far as the acting community goes, these are people who said that they didn't even want to have unvaccinated people in their audiences. And they call people like me plague rats and granny killers. So there's a handful of people that are like me and went through the same experience, and each of us is of the same mindset. We have no desire to ever include ourselves among these particular people, aka the acting community, ever again. The good news is that there's Avengers assembling now outside of that arena who are very, very high caliber, ex-Broadway, ex-Hollywood talent, who are coming together now and saying there's a problem, we see what the problems are, and we need to create something that's outside this system. And the response I've gotten from many people in the acting community is they're looking up to people like me, because they believe I'm showing them a new way forward, which I never asked for any of this, but I'll take it for now.
We'll make it 901. I can't wait to see Sowell, or your play on Thomas Sowell. I'd love you to come back once you have it produced and ready to go. I'd love to be in the audience. I'd love to help people stream it. And I'd love to have you back on the Will Cain Show. If nothing else, I want to follow up on the black community being gynocentric. What a fascinating thing you said that did not escape my attention, but I don't have the time today to fully explore. So I hope you will come back here and we can have further discussions on the Will Cain Show. Thank you, Clifton.
Of course, Will. Thanks for having me. You can go to sowellplay.com if you want to donate. Sowellplay.com.